Okay, so continuing our discussion on constructivism, let's look at some of the foundational theories behind constructivism. Okay, so as you see on the slide, we got noted, I'm gonna try to pronounce his name correctly. Is Jean Piaget. He was a Swiss theorist and a Swiss psychologist. And in addition, we have pause. Okay, as we continue our discussion on constructivists, let's look at some of the theorists behind constructivism, the most prominent theorists out there. So we want to talk about three different types of constructivism today, and we're really going to concentrate on cognitive constructivism, which is pretty much the work of Swiss psychologist Jean Piaget. We're going to talk about social constructivism, based on the work of Soviet psychologist Leo Vygotsky. And then finally, we're going to talk about radical constructivism, based on work of philosopher and professor of psychology. Let me try this one again. Ernst van Glasenfeld. So these are the three primary theorists we're going to kind of focus on as we can continue our discussion. So looking at constructivism, we want to first talk about cognitive constructivism. Now, cognitive constructivism is one of the most basic, straightforward forms of constructivism, and can be considered the basis of all subsequent forms of constructivism. And what this theory suggests is that knowledge is constructed by the learner through an interpretation of the new information along with their personal experiences based on their cognitive and mental ability. And that's kind of key here. So what we're talking about actually is that, again, as we established in the first video, that information is just that it doesn't become knowledge until the internal process of that learner actually converts it to knowledge. So the cognitive constructivist theory says it doesn't become knowledge until the internal process is done, but that's limited by the mental capacity of the learner itself. So, and if you look at this from the aspect of a child development aspect, we would not sit up there and try to teach an infant algebra because that mental capacity is not enough there. While we can give them all the information in the world, they can't convert that to knowledge because their mental capacity is not equipped to do that yet. As they mature and develop, then it will be able to do that. And that's exactly what this is saying. So it says that that information goes in, and then based on the mental capacity of the learner, that information is then converted to knowledge. So I think that's pretty much a neat way of actually summarizing cognitive constructivism. Let's look at the next one. We talked about social constructivism. Now, again, we talk about this with the work of Leo Vygotsky. And in this theory, Leo Vygotsky basically says that learning and knowledge building is actually majorly influenced by the experiences of the learner. And we're talking about individual learning that takes place because of group interactions and things of that nature. So in this theory, he actually suggests that actors such as teachers, family, friends, peers, administrators, anyone in that classroom actually affects the way the students is actually going to retain that information and convert it to knowledge. That has an impact on it. But the other key part of this theory is that it's not limited to the classroom. Interpretation also submits to influences outside of the school. So that's when we're talking about more of the friends or all those other things out there. So when we kind of look at that, and then let's put that into today's perspective. So what this theory is basically saying is that anything that that learner actually encounters has a potential of changing the way they actually convert information to knowledge. Video games, TV shows, movies, all of those things are influences there, along with the influences of parents, teachers, peers, and all those things influences the way that that person takes and perceives that knowledge, and then converts that knowledge to, takes and perceives that information, and then converts that information to knowledge. So this now brings us to the final form of constructivism we're talking about, and this was a little bit more complicated. This is the radical constructivism, which is, again, the actual theory of Ernest von Glasersfeld, excuse me. So this theory emphasizes that that the constructivism, it still does the same thing. It really builds on the fact that information from a textbook or whatever source is just that information, and it's not meaningful. What this one really does is really focuses on the fact that the students or the learners' conversion from information to knowledge is subjective. So it doesn't, if you kind of put this in the context of the other two, it kind of falls right in there. What von Glasersfeld is saying was, theory says, is basically, yes, information is converted to knowledge with a mental process, but that conversion is subjective to the way that individual sees the world or sees the actual external influences or whatever. And then they have to make sense of where the information fits within the puzzle of the of knowledge, so they can kind of lock it in there. So it kind of builds meaning. So the saying such as perception is reality is where this would come from. Don't want to go down the actual lot of the social ills in our society right now, but really want to kind of focus this on, with a student who is actually underprivileged and goes into a classroom and gets a standard math problem that says, if you have 2 apples and you give 1 apple away, how many would you have? So, most of us come to the same conclusion: I will have 1 apple remaining. But the student who actually, looks at this from another perspective would say, I would have 2 apples remaining because I wouldn't give my apple away because of my circumstances or whatever. And that is the kind of subjectiveness that kind of actually influences the way that student is going to convert that knowledge. Now, this is an important role for our teachers and instructors to kind of see where they're going with it through that things such as Socratic question and anything like that to actually measure the student's understanding of the concepts. So if the student actually sees it that way and explains this is why, and the teacher asks a simple question: okay, Richard, you said, you had 1 and you gave 1 away, but you still have 2. How is that possible? And that's when the student would actually come back and explain the logic behind that. And then the student would say, okay, I understand that, but in this example, let's physically give the apple away. And then they actually would get it. So it's kind of important to kind of stay engaged with this one. As I said, each one of these theories, none of them discounting the ones prior to them. But as I said, so if we look at it, cognitive constructivism basically says that it is a mental process that the student actually goes through that converts information to knowledge. Social constructivism basically says that mental process is influenced by those surroundings of that student, and those surroundings or those actors being teachers, peers, friends, family, or whatever. All those actors have a role and have influence in that student. And lastly, we talked about radical constructivism being influenced by the students' subjectivity to interpret the information the way they actually see it. So it's going to fit into their lives the way they see it. Another example of this theory would be a teacher presenting a problem to a classroom, such as measure the length of the Mayflower. And rather than stating the problem and introducing a ruler, the teachers would simply just suggest, allow the student to reflect and come up with their own means of measuring the Mayflower. So again, that's kind of working within those bounds and allow those students to kind of explore that information or whatever, and still getting across the finish line there. So as we kind of continue on in this series, we're going to kind of pick up a little bit talking about actual model that's actually related to constructivism. That's going to be a power model, and that will be the next video we're going to talk about. Thank you.